DSC 2 suggestions for Semester 2 English Honours students from the History of English Literature Prose 15 marks question. We have discussed the role of periodicals like the Tatler and the Spectator in the development of English prose in the 18th century, or how the periodical literature contributed to modern authorship and the popularization of prose forms, or examine the narrative and stylistic features of prose in early British periodicals. One question from the periodicals can come, so be prepared with the Tatler and the Spectator and the development of English prose in the 18th century. Next, we have a very important question is from the Romantic essayist, the contribution of the Romantic prose period from Charles Lamb, William Hazlitt and Thomas de Quincey. It is also important for the short answer questions as well. Then we have the contributions of Thomas Carlyle, again a very important figure in relation to the Victorian prose. Then number 4, we have discussed the significance of modern prose with any two authors, Virginia Woolf and James Joyce. Virginia Woolf is very important figure in this year's examination, as in the previous year they have given James Joyce, so this time most probably they will try to give Virginia Woolf. Discuss the contributions of Victorian novelists George Eliot, Charlotte Bronte, Charles Dickens. Again a very important question. If you have to prepare only one question, then definitely go with number 5, the contributions of Victorian novelists. Then we have the characteristics of the romantic novel with reference to the works of Jane Austen and Walter Scott. And number 7, we have the features of modern novel. So out of the 7 is actually very important for the examination point of view. And if you have to read only one, then go for the Victorian novelist one, number 5. And the second one could be anyone from the Romantic period, from Thomas de Quincey, Charles Lamb, or from the Victorian prose writers like Thomas Carlyle and John Ruskin. Also make sure that you prepare on Virginia Woolf, as it is also very important. From short notes, we have mentioned 25 topics, and from that the most important what we think is George Eliot, Oliver Goldsmith and Thomas Carlyle. Also they can also give Thomas de Quincey. All these are important, so don't waste your time and start preparing. DSC 2 short notes, 5 marks question. These 25 topics are the most important short notes for the History of English Literature Prose section. Firstly, we have Richard Steele or the 18th century periodicals, where we have to write about the Tatler and the Spectator, where Richard Steele and Joseph Addison used to write about coffee house gossip and social observations. Then we have Thomas de Quincey, who has written the Confessions of an English Opium Eater. Thomas Carlyle, who was one of the pioneer writers of the Victorian prose. Then we have Walter Scott, John Ruskin, Charles Lamb, who has written the Essays of Elia, William Hazlitt, who has written the Round Table Talk, an influential critic of Shakespeare and other Elizabethan dramatists, Jane Austen, who has written major novels like Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. Then we have George Eliot, who has written Adam Bede, The Mill on the Floss, Middlemarch, Daniel Deronda, Charles Dickens, who has written Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Bleak House, Sir Philip Sidney, who has written The Arcadia, Pamela or Virtue Rewarded, an epistolary novel by Samuel Richardson, whose novels explore themes such as virtue, morality, social class, gender roles and human psychology. Henry Fielding, who has written the Tom Jones and Joseph Andrews. Oliver Goldsmith, a very important one, who has written The Vicar of Wakefield, She Stoops to Conquer the Deserted Village. Samuel Johnson, who wrote A Dictionary of the English Language. Thomas Hardy, who wrote novels like Far from the Meddling Crowd, The Mayor of Casterbridge, Tales of the Urban Village, Jude the Obscure. Elizabeth Gaskell, Mary Batten, Wives and Daughters, North and South, Charlotte Bronte, who has written Jane Eyre, Shirley Willett, and The Professor. They can also give you to write a short note on Jane Eyre, the novel by Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, her sister, and then Wuthering Heights, her work, Areopagitica by John Milton, and finally John Bunyan and The Pilgrim's Progress. You will get all the notes from our group. Do check in the comment section. From Francis Bacon's Off Studies, 15 marks questions include explain and illustrate the Bacon's use of aphorisms in Off Studies. How do they contribute to the essay's lasting appeal? Bacon's style in Off Studies, and or they can also ask like Francis Bacon as an essayist. Then we have critically appreciate Off Studies as a model of Renaissance spirit in English prose. From Araby we have how does Araby reflect James Joyce's modernist narrative techniques? How does James Joyce use the first person narrative in Araby to convey the themes of illusion and reality? Discuss the role of epiphany in Araby. How does the narrator's realization at the end shape the meaning of the story? Comment on the ending of the story and critically evaluate Araby as a coming of age story. What does Joyce reveal about the nature of adolescence and desire? From Shooting an Elephant, we have discussed Shooting an Elephant as an autobiographical reflection on British imperialism in Burma and its post colonial implications. Discuss the theme of imperialism in Shooting an Elephant. How does Orwell critique the idea of the white man's burden through the narrative? Analyze the symbolic significance of elephant in Orwell's essay in the context of colonial domination and resistance. From Dream Children, we have discussed Charles Lamb as an essayist, the characterization of the narrator, James Elia. How does Charles Lamb portray his own childhood in A Dream Children or the autobiographical elements in A Dream Children? Examine the portrayal of great grandmother Field in Dream Children and the prose style of Charles Lamb. From Temporary Matter of Jhumpa Lahiri, we have the theme of grief and loss, significance of the title, comment on the ending, the character of Shukumar and Shobha, and the style of Jhumpa Lahiri, the narrative style and structuring, how she conveys the emotional undercurrents of the story. For 5 marks questions, we have from A Temporary Matter, what is the main reason for Shobha and Shukumar's emotional distance? How does the nightly power outage change the couple's interaction? Why is the darkness symbolic in this story? How does food and dining feature in the progression of the story? From Araby we have what initially attracts the boy to Mangan's sister? Why is the bazaar called Araby? What obstacles delay the boy from going to the Araby? What role does the setting of Dublin play in the story? At the end, what did the boy realize? What is the story's message about coming of age or adolescence? From Dream Children we have who was Grandmother Field? How did Lamb describe Grandmother Field's personality? How was Grandmother Field in her religious devotion? What was the story carved on the wooden chimney represent? What was the significance of the garden and the fruit trees? What was the atmosphere surrounding the house regarding the ghost of spirits? How did Lamb depict the emotional impact of Grandmother Field's death? From Shooting an Elephant we have what role does Orwell hold in Burma in the story? Why is Orwell unpopular with the local Burmese people? What incident prompts Orwell to go out with a gun? What is must and how does it affect the elephant? Why does Orwell initially didn't want to shoot the elephant? What causes Orwell to ultimately decide to shoot the elephant? How does Orwell characterize the nature of imperialism in the essay? Then how does the setting of Burma contribute to the story's themes? From Off Studies we have What does Bacon mean by studies are for delight, for ornament and for ability? How does Bacon justify the claim some books are to be tasted and others to be swallowed? Why does Bacon say reading make the man, conference a ready man? What is Bacon's view on books that are not directly useful? What does Bacon suggest about the relationship between studies and judgment? What does Bacon mean by crafty men condemn studies? Why does Bacon's studies have their chief use for health and did not for disease? Discuss Bacon's classification of books and its implications for a learner. How is Bacon's approach to studies an example of pragmatic philosophy? And our first question is, discuss the role of periodicals like the Tatler and the Spectator in the development of English prose in the 18th century. The periodicals of the Tatler and the Spectator, founded by Richard Steele and Joseph Addison, represent pivotal movements in the evolution of 18th century English prose. Their emergence marked a transformation not only in literary form but also in the relationship between authorship, readership, and the dissemination of ideas, which contributed substantially to the rise of modern prose and periodical literature. The 18th century is often hailed as the age of prose and reason, a period when English prose attained remarkable clarity, elegance, and influence, eclipsing poetry in cultural significance. As Matthew Arnold observed, it was an age of prose and reason where prose helped shape public discourse and manners. Within this context, the Tatler and the Spectator innovated a new literary genre, the periodical essay, that combined social commentary, moral reflection, and literary criticism in an accessible and engaging style. These periodicals did not simply report news but aimed to cultivate refinement in manners, morals, and intellect, thereby playing an essential role in the formation of an emerging public sphere. The Tatler, launched by Richard Steele in 1709, introduced the periodical essay as a novel form. It set out with a clear social reform agenda, as Steele himself stated. The general purpose of this paper is to expose the false arts of life, to pull off the disguises of cunning, vanity, affection, and recommend a general simplicity in our dress, our discourse, and our behavior. This statement encapsulates the periodical's mission to critique superficial social affectations and promote sincerity and simplicity in everyday life. The Spectator perfected this form, publishing daily essays that featured a fictional narrator, Mr. Spectator, alongside a club of gentlemen observers. Addison declared its purpose explicitly in the issue number 10, to the end that their virtue and discretion may not be short, transient, intermittent starts of thought. I have resolved to refresh their memories from day to day till I have recovered them out of the desperate state of vice and folly into which the age is fallen. This reflects the deliberate, ongoing moral and intellectual education that the periodical sought to provide. Discuss the contributions of Charles Lamb, William Hazlitt, and Thomas Dickensy to Romantic period British prose, with special emphasis on their essayistic and narrative techniques. The contributions of Charles Lamb, William Hazlitt, and Thomas Dickensy to Romantic period British prose are foundational and distinctive, especially regarding their essayistic and narrative techniques. Each shaped the Romantic essay form by blending personal reflection, imaginative storytelling, and intellectual engagement in ways that highlighted individual subjectivity and emotional depth, setting a new standard for prose in the period. The Romantic period, late 18th to early 19th century, marked a significant evolution in British prose, characterized by an emphasis on individual experience, emotion, and imagination. While Romantic poetry has traditionally dominated critical attention, prose writers like Lamb, Hazlitt, and Dickensy made profound contributions to the era's literary landscape through the essay form. They transformed essays from mere didactic or social commentary into intimate explorative narratives rich with personal voice, psychological depth, and literary artistry. Their work helped redefine modern authorship as dialogic and introspective, paving the way for the romantic essay as a literary genre that instructs and delights through a uniquely personal lens. Charles Lamb's essays, mainly published under the pseudonym Elia, are renowned for their deeply personal, conversational, and reflective style. Lamb's writings emphasize individual emotion and imagination, key hallmarks of Romanticism, while celebrating ordinary life with warmth, humor, and affectionate nostalgia. Lamb's use of pseudonyms enabled him to examine his own life and the world at some remove. Lamb's use of pseudonyms enabled him to examine his own life, blending fact and fiction in a dreamlike, anecdotal manner. His essay Dream Children, he particularly uses this technique where he imaginatively constructs a dialogue about lost children, evoking things of lost dreams and innocence. William Hazlitt advanced the Romantic essay through his incisive, eloquent prose that combined critical insight with psychological depth. Unlike Lamb's nostalgic tone, Hazlitt's essays often engage more directly with philosophical and cultural criticism, though they retain a deeply personal and passionate voice. Discuss the contributions of Thomas Carlyle and John Ruskin to Victorian prose, highlighting their distinctive prose styles and their impact on social, historical, and art criticism. The contributions of Thomas Carlyle and John Ruskin to Victorian prose are monumental, reflecting the era's intense intellectual engagement with social, historical, and artistic issues. Both writers exemplified the Victorian commitment to moral and cultural critique, each developing a distinctive prose style with far-reaching influence in their respective domains. Their works demonstrate how Victorian prose evolved as a powerful vehicle for complex ideas, blending passionate oratory with deep reflection, shaping public discourse on history, society, and art. Victorian prose flourished during the 19th century as a form deeply interwoven with the moral and intellectual fabric of the era. It was marked by a shift from the personal lyricism of Romantic prose to a more expansive, critical, and often didactic mode of writing that engaged with contemporary social realities and cultural questions. Thomas Carlyle and John Ruskin stand out as two of the most influential prose writers of the Victorian age, whose distinctive styles and thematic concerns shaped not only literary culture but also social and artistic criticism. Their prose is notable for its rhetorical power, moral seriousness, and innovative use of language, creating works that are both intellectually challenging and stylistically unique. Discuss the characteristics of romantic novel with reference to the works of Jane Austen and Walter Scott, highlighting their treatment of individualism, social themes, and narrative style. The romantic novel, emerging in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, represents a pivotal phase in literary history, where individualism, social themes, and innovative narrative styles were distinctly foregrounded. This discussion elucidates the characteristics of the romantic novel through the works of Jane Austen and Sir Walter Scott, two seminal authors whose novels embodied the era's literary and cultural shifts. Their treatment of individualism, engagement with social themes, and narrative techniques reveal the diversity within Romanticism's influence on the novel form and its evolution. Romanticism marked a shift from the rationalist and formal conventions of the 18th century to a heightened emphasis on emotion, individual experience, and the sublime in nature and history. The novel in this period became a key medium of exploring personal and societal complexities. Jane Austen and Walter Scott offer contrasting yet complementary glimpses of Romanticism's impact on the novel. Austen, with her sharp, ironic social comedies centered on domestic life and individual moral growth, Scott, with his grand historical romances that revive the past's grandeur and dynamic social interactions. Together, they highlight the romantic novel spectrum from intimate social realism to expansive imaginative historical narratives. As the features of the modern novel, emphasizing experimental narrative structures, psychological depth, and themes of alienation with reference to James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. The modern novel represents a profound transformation in the form, content, and narrative techniques of fiction during the early 20th century, breaking away from traditional storytelling to explore deeper psychological realities and existential themes. The modern novel emerged as a part of the broader modernist movement, which responded to the dislocations and uncertainties introduced by rapid industrialization, World War I, and shifts in philosophical and psychological thought. Rejecting the linear chronological plots and omniscient narrators of earlier Victorian novels, modernist writers like Joyce and Woolf sought to depict the fragmented and subjective nature of reality as experienced by the individual consciousness. Their novels emphasize the fluidity of time and memory, intricate inner lives, and the alienation of characters navigating complex social and existential realities. One of the hallmark features of modern novels is their break with conventional narrative forms. Both Joyce and Woolf employ experimental narratives that dismantle traditional plot structures to capture the flow of consciousness and perception. Joyce's groundbreaking novel Ulysses exemplifies the stream of consciousness technique where the narrative replicates the continuous flow of the character's thought, feelings, and sensory impressions in real life. This method eschews linear storytelling and external exposition, instead, immersing readers in the subjective experience. From section B of the DSC 2 paper, we have Francis Bacon's Off Studies. Explain and illustrate Bacon's use of aphorisms in Off Studies. How do they contribute to the essay's lasting appeal? Aphoristic style is a style which is defined by brief, memorable expressions that capture profound philosophical and practical truths. His use of aphorisms contributes compellingly to the essay's lasting appeal, making Bacon's wisdom easily accessible and quotable for generations. Aphorisms are statements that convey universal truths or observations in a condensed form. Francis Bacon is acknowledged as the father of English essay and the father of modern prose, and his essays are full of practical wisdom of life, aphoristic, formal, impersonal, and informative. In Off Studies, Bacon employs this technique to distill complex ideas about the uses, value, and limitations of study, offering readers a series of striking, self-contained maxims. Bacon's essay opens with the famous tripartite aphorism: studies serve for delight, for ornament, and for ability. Their chief use for delight is in the privateness and retiring, for ornament is in discourse, and for ability is in the judgment and disposition of business. The statement efficiently categorizes the principal benefits of studies, achieving clarity and force in a few lines. The phrase's rhythm and parallel structure encapsulate the essay's theme, setting the tone for further condensed wisdom. A hallmark of Bacon's aphoristic style is vivid metaphors and analogies. Then we have critically appreciate Off Studies as a model of the Renaissance spirit in English prose, or the theme of Off Studies. Critical appreciation of Off Studies. Harold Bloom included Bacon among the essential writers of the English language, praising work Off Studies as a work that continues to instruct and delight centuries after its composition. The tripartite purpose of studies, the balanced approach to learning, the transformative power of different disciplines, and studies as remedy for mental deficiencies, the stylistic excellence and enduring appeal. Helen Gardner noted that Bacon's essays, particularly Off Studies, represent the first truly modern prose in English. From Araby by James Joyce, we have how does Araby reflect James Joyce's modernist narrative themes? How James Joyce exemplifies modernist narrative techniques through his deep psychological insight, fragmented structure, subjective narration, and symbolic imagery. Modernism in literature sought to break from traditional storytelling, exploring subjectivity, fragmented realities, and the inner workings of consciousness. Joyce, a pioneer of this movement, uses Araby to explore themes of desire, idealism, and disappointment through innovative narrative methods. The story's evocative language and experimental style reveal how Joyce reshaped English prose to express modern existential anxieties and perceptions. The narrator's emotions saturate the narrative, as when he says, Her name sprang to my lips at moments in strange prayers and praises which I myself did not understand. This line illustrates the subjective experience blending with almost spiritual devotion, conveying the intensity and confusion of youthful passion. Joyce invites readers to inhabit the narrator's perspective, fully emphasizing personal feelings over external events. Then we have the use of symbols in James Joyce's Araby. The first line introduces blindness as a symbol. The blind street foreshadows the narrator's own naivety and lack of true insight both about himself and the world around him. Mangan's sister is not just a character but a symbol herself. She embodies the narrator's idealized love and religious reverence, often described in terms of light and purity. Then we have the theme of illusion and reality in respect to James Joyce's Araby. The role of epiphany in Araby. How does the narrator's realization of the end shape the meaning of this story or comment on the ending of the story? Araby as a coming of age story, or what does Joyce reveal about the nature of adolescence and desire in this story? The character of boy in the short story, how he is characterized by a deep, almost spiritual infatuation with Mangan's sister, which shapes his perceptions and desires. The character of Mangan's sister in Araby, how she embodies the narrator's youthful idealism, romantic infatuation, and the broader theme of longing intertwined with disillusionment. From Shooting an Elephant, we have discussed the symbolism of the elephant. How does Orwell use it to represent the effect of colonialism on the colonizer and the colonized? Next, we have considered the ending. What does Orwell finally understand about his actions reveal about imperialism and personal agency? The ending depicts imperialism as a tragic contradiction. While it promises control and dominance for the colonizer, it simultaneously enslaves him to an illusory role that demands cruelty, moral surrender, and loss of freedom. Orwell's personal agony and poignant reflections rendered the essay a timeless meditation on the paradox of power, the limits of personal agency, and the devastating human consequences of empire. Discuss Shooting an Elephant as an autobiographical reflection on British imperialism in Burma and its post-colonial implications. Written in 1936 when Orwell was serving as a police officer in British-controlled Burma, Shooting an Elephant is both a personal memoir and a sharp political allegory. Though Orwell personally detested imperialism, he found himself enmeshed in the colonial system, embodying its contradiction. The essay explores not only the external conflicts of empire but also the internal conflicts experienced by its agents. The incident of shooting the elephant becomes symbolic of the pressures and paradoxes facing the colonizer, making the story a powerful post-colonial critique of colonial domination. Discuss the theme of imperialism in Shooting an Elephant. How does Orwell critique the idea of white man's burden to the narrative theme of post-colonialism? Through the narrator's experience, Orwell shows imperial control as fragile and performative rather than absolute. The narrator reveals the constant tension between power and vulnerability. I perceived in this moment that when the white man turns tyrant, it is as his own freedom that he destroys. This insight captured the paradox of imperialism. From Dream Children by Charles Lamb, we have discussed Charles Lamb as an essayist with reference to Dream Children a Reverie. It was asked in the 2024 paper of DSC 2. Lamb's essays are distinctively personal and informal, often marked by a reflective and confessional tone. Unlike formal treatises, his essays invite the reader into his private thoughts and memories, demonstrating a conversational style that is warm and intimate. Dream Children is deeply autobiographical essay where this intimacy is not palpable. Charles Lamb's ability to weave together reality and fantasy, engaging readers emotionally with his rare blend of humor and pathos. The essay opens with Lamb telling gentle, affectionate stories to his two imaginary children, Alice and John. These stories recall his own childhood, family history, and lost relatives, such as his beloved brother John and his grandmother, Mrs. Field. The narrative flows in a very casual, almost conversational way, with Lamb himself shifting from the role of a narrator and a loving father figure. The fluidity of the narrative with long complex sentence and no paragraph breaks mimics the continuity and fluidity of a dream, reinforcing the essay's subtitle a reverie. Next we have discussed the characterization of James Elia, the narrator in Dream Children. How does Lamb use his character to explore themes of loss and longing? Charles Lamb introduces James Elia as a deeply personal narrator who speaks tenderly to his imaginary children about his family history. Then we have how does Charles Lamb portray his own childhood in a Dream Children, a Reverie, or the autobiographical elements in a Dream Children? Lamb's portrayal of childhood is deeply colored by affectionate memories of his grandmother, Mrs. Field, a prominent figure in the essay. Mrs. Field is depicted as a kind, religious, and respectable woman who played a formative role in Lamb's early life. Examine the portrayal of great-grandmother Field in Dream Children. What role does she play in the narrator's memory and the overall essay? Grandmother Field is depicted as a woman of great religious devotion who commanded respect and love from her family and community. Lamb describes her as a very religious and well-versed in religious texts. Next we have discussed the distinctive features of Charles Lamb's writing style as reflected in Dream Children. How do humor, pathos, and personal reflection combine to create the essay's unique effect? A dominant theme in Dream Children is nostalgia, a yearning for the past and a grieving for what is lost. Lamb's narrator fondly recalls his grandmother Mrs. Field and the old family in Norfolk and his childhood experiences. From A Temporary Matter by Jhumpa Lahiri, we have, would you agree with the view that the theme of grief and loss is central to A Temporary Matter? Give reasons. It was asked in 2024 paper of DSC 2. Then we have the significance of the title of A Temporary Matter, how it is rich with symbolism and thematic significance. Next we have critically discussed the ending of A Temporary Matter. How does Lahiri's conclusion shape your understanding of Shobha and Shukumar's relationship and grief? Illustrate with reference to key scenes and lines. The ending is profoundly moving and complex that encapsulates the themes of grief, communication, and relational dissolution. Throughout the narrative, Shobha and Shukumar's marriage unfolds in silence and estrangement following the stillbirth of their child. The story's conclusion reveals the failure of their attempts to reconnect despite the confessional game they play during the nightly power outages. Lahiri's ending shapes the reader's understanding of the couple's relationship as one marked by irreparable loss and emotional distance, while also highlighting the different ways grief impacts intimacy. Next, we have discussed the character of Shukumar in A Temporary Matter. How does his inward retreat and emotional isolation reflect the story's themes of grief and loss? Then we have critically analyzed Shobha's response to tragedy in A Temporary Matter. In what ways do her actions and choices illuminate her psychological state, and how do they affect her relationship with Shukumar? Then we have explained Lahiri's use of narrative style and structure in conveying the emotional undercurrents of the story? How do shifts in tone, mood, or pacing serve thematic ends? Or Jhumpa Lahiri as an essayist, or the style of Jhumpa Lahiri's prose writing? For 5 marks question, we have from the temporary matter by Jhumpa Lahiri, what is the main reason for Shobha and Shukumar's emotional distance? Their emotional distance mainly comes from the grief and pain they feel after their baby was stillborn, which is when a baby dies inside the mother's womb after a certain period of pregnancy and is born without any signs of life. This trauma makes them avoid and isolate themselves from each other. How does the nightly power outage change the couple's interaction? It forces Shobha and Shukumar to be physically together during the dinner hour. The darkness makes them drop their usual walls. They kept talking and sharing secrets. Why is the darkness symbolic? It symbolizes the unknown feelings and hidden truths in their marriage. How do Shobha and Shukumar use their time in the dark? They play a game where they share secrets and confessions. What role does the sharing of secrets play in the narrative? It exposes the hidden problems and truths in their relationship. How does Lahiri contrast light and darkness in this story? Light represents the reality and harsh truths they must face. Darkness provides a safe space to hide and reveal secrets gently. What is revealed about Shukumar's experience at the hospital? Shukumar reveals he was at the hospital shortly after the baby's birth. He held their dead baby in his arms, something Shobha did not know. Why does Shobha decide to move out? Shobha has emotionally checked out of the marriage. The loss of their baby and lack of communication made her distant. How does grief influence the couple's communication patterns? Grief causes them to avoid each other and stop sharing feelings. What does the ending suggest about their relationship? The ending shows sorrow and shared pain but no reconciliation. They cry together in the dark, acknowledging what they now understand. It implies their marriage is ending despite the brief connection. How is the title a temporary matter connected to both the blackout and their marriage? The blackout is a temporary matter, just a short time of darkness. Their emotional connections during the blackout is also temporary. The story shows how fragile and brief their moment of closeness is. It suggests that their problems are deep and not easily fixed. How does food and dining feature in the progression of the story? Dinner time becomes a setting for the couple's interactions during the blackout. Eating together in the dark forces them to be into each other's company. Food and dining symbolize their attempts to reconnect. Their shared meals contrast with their usual separate eating habits. From Francis Bacon's Of Studies, short answer questions we have: what does Bacon mean by studies serve for delight, for ornament, and for ability? Studies give pleasure and enjoyment, which is delight. They make conversation and speech better, which is ornament. They improve judgment and practical skills, which is ability. Explain the practical utility of studies according to Bacon. It helps make better decisions in business and daily lives. It helps handle complex problems and manage affairs as well. How does Bacon justify the claim some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed? Not all books are equally valuable or need to have the same focus. This shows the need to be selective and wise in reading. What warning does Bacon give about excessive studying? Spending too much time in study causes laziness. Studies must be balanced with experience and action. Overstudying without practical use is harmful. How does Bacon distinguish between different kinds of readers? Some read superficially just to show off, others read without questioning. Wise readers read critically. Why does Bacon say reading makes a man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man? Reading fills the mind with knowledge, talking with others makes a person quick and ready in speech, writing helps a person express ideas clearly and precisely. All three together develop a well-rounded, capable individual. How are studies perfected by experience? Experience limits and direct study, making knowledge practical. Without experience, study alone can be too general or abstract. What is Bacon's view on books that are not directly useful? Select books wisely for effective learning. What does Bacon suggest about the relationship between studies and judgment? Studies improve general judgment for managing affairs as well. Experts may know specifics, but scholars understand the whole. Explain Bacon's opinion on the use of studies in business and daily affairs. They help plan, advise, and manage better than narrow expertise. How does Bacon describe the difference between studying and using knowledge practically? Studying alone can be too theoretical or slow action. Practical use tastes and applies what is learned. Experience ground study in reality. Wise men use studies as tools, not just for theory. What does Bacon mean by crafty men condemn studies? Clever but dishonest people dislike studies because knowledge exposes lies. They avoid learning to hide their tricks. Simple people admire studies but don't understand them fully. Wise people use studies effectively as a tool for truth and wisdom. Studies reveal and combat deception. Short answer questions from Araby by James Joyce. What initially attracts the boy to Mangan's sister? Her beauty, her presence, the way she moves and talks. How does the boy describe his feelings for Mangan's sister? He feels his body like a harp, with her words as fingers on strings. He daydreams about her often and feels nervous around her. Why is the bazaar called Araby? Because it evokes fantasy. It represents an oriental market full of wonder and mystery. The name contrasts with the dull everyday Dublin setting. How does the boy's view of the bazaar contrast with his reality? He imagines it as magical and exciting, but the actual bazaar is dull, ordinary, and closing. What obstacles delay the boy from going to Araby? His uncle comes. The boy must wait for permission and money. His aunt hosts a visitor. How does the boy's uncle affect his plans? The uncle returns late, drunk, and forgetful. He delays giving the boy money for the bazaar. What role does the setting of Dublin play in this story? Dublin is dark, dull, and full of ordinary life. It contrasts with the boy's romantic fantasies. How does the boy's perception of Araby change throughout the story? He first sees it as a place of wonder and hope. He becomes obsessed with buying a gift there for the girl. When he arrives, he finds it closing and unimpressive. He realizes the bazaar and his dreams are illusions. What role does religion or the convent retreat play in this story? The girl must attend a convent retreat during Araby. It symbolizes religious discipline and restriction. The convent represents the limits on the girl's freedom. It contrasts the boy's romantic imagination with reality. How does Joyce use sensory details to enhance the mood? He describes sights, sounds, and smells vividly. Darkness and shadows create a gloomy atmosphere. What does the boy realize about himself at the end? He recognizes the gap between desire and real life. He feels embarrassment and he becomes more aware of the reality of life. How does this story explore themes of idealism versus reality? The story contrasts hopeful dreams with adult indifference. The boy's epiphany represents a loss of innocence. What is the significance of the boy's feelings of vanity? His vanity shows desire to be admired and loved. It drives his wish to impress the girl. How does the imagery of light and darkness function in this story? Light symbolizes hope, darkness symbolizes ignorance and disappointment. What is this story's message about coming of age or adolescence? The story shows the transition from innocence to awareness. Adolescence brings confusion, longing, and short answer questions of 5 marks from Dream Children a Reverie by Charles Lamb. Who was Grandmother Field and what role did she play in Lamb's childhood? Grandmother Field was Lamb's maternal great-grandmother. She took care of a large family home in Norfolk. She was a strong, caring figure in Lamb's early life. Lamb spent holidays and time in her house filled with fond memories. She symbolized family tradition and security. How did Lamb describe Grandmother Field's personality? She was tall, upright, and dignified in youth. What was significant about the house in Norfolk where Grandmother Field lived? It was a large old manor filled with memories and family history. How did Grandmother Field show her religious devotion? She did not fear the ghosts said to haunt the house. Her faith gave her courage and comfort. What does the story carved on the wooden chimney represent? The carving tells the tragic ballad The Children in the Wood. It symbolizes innocence, cruelty, and family betrayal. Why was the marble chimney piece considered a loss to the house's charm? The marble piece was a modern replacement that lacked the character of the old carving. It removed the nostalgic artistic story that connected the house to its past. It symbolized the encroachment of modern changes destroying tradition. What was the significance of the garden? The garden was a place of beauty, innocence, and childhood freedom. Fruits like peaches and grapes symbolize natural abundance. It contrasts with the later reality of loss and sorrow. How did John, Lamb's brother, relate to Grandmother Field? John was lively and adventurous, contrasting with Lamb's quieter nature. He was brave and teased Lamb, showing sibling closeness. Why is Grandmother Field described as courageous? She faced illness and death with bravery. She did not fear supernatural stories around the house. She maintained strength in caring for the family home. How did the children react to the story of the ballad? They were fascinated or deeply interested. Captivated, it captivated their imagination with its drama. Why does Lamb refer to the essay as a reverie? A reverie is a daydream or a pleasant but unreal imagination. The essay is a dreamy reflection mixing fact and fantasy. Lamb imagines conversations and memories that never fully existed. Short answer questions of 5 marks from Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. What role does Orwell hold in Burma in the story? Orwell is a subdivisional police officer in the British occupied Burma. His job is to maintain law and order as a representative of the British Empire. Orwell symbolizes the colonial power and its control over the colonized. Why is Orwell unpopular with the local Burmese people? Because he represents the British imperial authority that oppresses them. The Burmese express their hatred by mocking and taunting him. What incident prompts Orwell to go out with a gun? An elephant suffering from must breaks free. And causes destruction in the bazaar. The elephant tramples, hurts, ruins property and kills a man. Orwell is called to control the situation and prevent further damage. What is must and how does it affect the elephant? Must is a temporary hormonal disorder in male elephants, making them aggressive. Why does Orwell initially not want to shoot the elephant? The elephant is calm and not threatening at the moment he finds it. He sees the elephant as a magnificent and valuable creature. Killing the elephant seems unnecessary and wasteful. How does Orwell describe the destruction caused by the elephant? It trampled over grass herds and overturned a garbage collection van. It destroyed parts of the bazaar, causing chaos. The destruction included killing a man, making the situation serious. What causes Orwell to ultimately decide to shoot the elephant? The large crowd following him expects the elephant to be shot. Orwell fears losing face and looking weak in front of the locals. He feels pressure to maintain the image of British authority. He shoots the elephant to avoid humiliation. What does Orwell mean when he says he shot the elephant to avoid looking fool? He refers to the pressure of colonial expectations and the macho pride. How does Orwell compare the elephant to a huge and costly piece of machinery? Orwell sees the elephant as a valuable property of the empire. Destroying the elephant is like ruining expensive infrastructure. The metaphor shows the economic importance placed on the animal. Describe the reaction of the crowd when Orwell shoots the elephant. The crowd reacts with a deep, low sigh of relief, followed by cheers. Why does Orwell say imperialism make the white man a puppet? Because the colonizers must act according to the expectations of the colonized. They lose personal freedom to maintain power and respect. Their actions are controlled by fear or humiliation. DSC 2 short notes for 5 marks. Richard Steele or the 18th century periodicals. Pioneered periodical essays with the Tatler 1709 and the Spectator 1711 alongside Joseph Addison. Used coffeehouse gossip and social observations to encourage polite conversation and moral refinement. promoted Whig values and contributed to shaping public opinion and sociable debate in Britain. Popularized essays on manners, morals, theatre, and contemporary life, blending humor and seriousness. Created lasting influence on journalism and literary culture through concise, engaging prose. Thomas Dickensy, born in Manchester in 1785, famous for his autobiographical work Confessions of an English Opium Eater, which deals his addiction experience. Ran away from school at 17, later attended Oxford but never graduated. Developed close contacts with Wordsworth and Coleridge. Wrote extensively for magazines like London Magazine and Blackwood's Edinburgh Magazine on diverse topics including philosophy, literary criticism, and politics. Known for prose with poetic and vivid style, combining personal confession with broad intellectual discourse. His writings influenced romantic literature and introduced addiction narrative into English literature. Thomas Dickensy died in 1859. Thomas Carlyle, Scottish essayist, historian, and social critic, born in 1795, known for his forceful style called Carlyle. Major works include Sartor Disserters, a philosophical novel, The French Revolution, a historical work, and On Hero Worship Theory. Introduced the great man theory of history, emphasizing the impact of exceptional leaders and heroes, criticized industrial society's materialism, promoting moral responsibility, work ethic, and strong leadership in social reform. His vivid dramatic style and philosophical insights influenced Victorian literature and social thought profoundly. Walter Scott, Scottish novelist, Walter Scott, Scottish novelist, poet, and historian, considered the pioneer of the historical novel genre. Famous works include Waverley 1814, Ivanhoe 1819, Rob Roy 1817, The Heart of Midlothian 1818, and narrative poems like The Lay of the Last Minstrel 1805. Combined history with fiction, introducing real historical events and fictional characters in vivid storytelling. Worked as a lawyer and clerk but gained international fame through his writing, blending Scottish culture and national identity. His novels often explore themes of social change, conflict between tradition and progress, and romantic chivalry. John Ruskin, English Victorian polymath, art critic, writer, artist, and social thinker who influenced art, architecture, and society profoundly. Best known for Modern Painters 1843, where he championed J.M.W. Turner and argued for truth to nature in art. Promoted the Gothic revival in architecture through works like The Seven Lamps of Architecture 1849 and The Stones of Venice 1851. Emphasized the moral and social function of art and architecture, connecting them to societal health and ethics. Advocated conservation, sustainability, and ethical consumerism. Founded the Guild of St. George for social reform and inspired the National Trust. Charles Lamb, English essayist, poet, and critic, born in 1775, best known for essays of Elia published in London Magazine between 1820 to 1825. Lamb's essays are known for personal tone, wit, humor, pathos, and romantic sensibility. He created the persona Elia for his writings. Close friends with contemporaries like Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Hazlitt, forming a key romantic literary cycle. He worked as a clerk in the East India Company for over 30 years while writing. Themes include childhood memories, London life, theatre, and fantasy. Also famous for Tales from Shakespeare, a simplified retelling of Shakespeare plays for children, co-authored with his sister Mary Lum. William Hazlitt, English essayist, drama and literary critic, philosopher and social commentator. Known for vivid, passionate essays on art, literature, politics and human nature. Famous works include The Round Table 1817 and The Table Talk 1821. Influential critic of Shakespeare and other Elizabethan dramatists, contributed to periodicals and lectured on English poets and comic writers. A political radical and outspoken social critic, he often clashed with contemporaries but admired by peers like Wordsworth, Shelley and Keats. His prose style is celebrated for clarity, directness, humanity and psychological insight, making him one of the greatest essayists in English. Jane Austen, English novelist born in 1775, known for her sharp social commentary and novels about the gentry's everyday life. Her major works include Sense and Sensibility, published in 1811, Pride and Prejudice, 1813, Mansfield Park, 1814, Emma, 1816, Northanger Abbey, and Persuasion, both published in 1818. Her novels critique the dependency of women on marriage for social and economic security with witty irony and realistic characters. Lived mostly in Hampshire, publishing anonymously during her life, gained widespread fame posthumously through family efforts. Known for clear prose, memorable characters like Elizabeth Bennet, and themes of morality, class, love, and social development. George Eliot. George Eliot was the pen name of Mary Ann Evans (1819 to 1880), an English novelist, poet, journalist, and translator, regarded as one of the leading writers of the Victorian era. She adopted the male pseudonym George Eliot to ensure her works were taken seriously and to separate her literary identity from her personal life. Her major novels include Araby 1859, The Mill on the Floss 1860, Silas Marner 1861, Romola 1863, Felix Holt the Radical 1866, Middlemarch 1871, and Daniel Deronda 1876. Eliot's works are known for their realism, psychological insight, detailed depiction of rural English life, and exploration of social and moral issues. Her novel Middlemarch is often considered one of the greatest English novels, praised for its complex characters and deep social commentary. Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was a leading Victorian novelist known for his vivid characters, social criticism, and depictions of 19th century English life. His major works include Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Bleak House, Great Expectations, A Tale of Two Cities, and A Christmas Carol. Dickens pioneered the serial publication of novels with cliffhanger endings, which kept readers in suspense and allowed him to adjust plots based on audiences' feedback. His novels highlight social issues such as poverty, child labor, corruption, injustice, and class disparities, creating lasting social impact. Dickens's storytelling style combines humor, satire, pathos, and memorable characters, and the term Dickensian refers to social conditions reminiscent of his works. Sir Philip Sidney. Sidney was an eminent English poet, courtier, scholar, and soldier of the Elizabethan era, known for his literary contributions in poetry and prose. His major work, The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia, often called Arcadia, is a pastoral romance that blends elements of chivalric adventure, political intrigue, and idealized rural life. Arcadia exists in two versions: the earlier Old Arcadia written in a straightforward narrative style, and the longer, more complex New Arcadia with nested storylines and additional political and adventurous episodes. The work was very influential for its time, inspiring writers like Shakespeare, example the Gloucester subplot in King Lear, and others, and enjoyed popularity for over a century after its publication. Sidney's Arcadia is praised for its fusion of prose and poetry, its exploration of love and virtue, and its significance in shaping English Renaissance literature and the prose romance genre. Pamela or Virtue Rewarded, 1740. Pamela is an epistolary novel by Samuel Richardson, often considered one of the first English novels. The novel tells the story of a 15-year-old maidservant, Pamela Andrews, who resists the sexual advances of her wealthy master, Mr. B, and ultimately is rewarded with marriage. The story is narrated through Pamela's letters and diary entries, highlighting her virtue, morality, and determination to guard her chastity. The novel explores themes of virtues, class distinctions, power dynamics, and the idea of virtue being rewarded through moral steadfastness. Pamela influenced the development of the novel as a literary form and sparkled debates about social class, gender roles, and morality in 18th century England. Samuel Richardson. He was an English novelist and printer, widely recognized as a pioneer of the English novel, particularly known for his use of the epistolary form, novels written as letters. His major works include Pamela or Virtue Rewarded, 1740, Clarissa or the History of a Young Lady, 1747, and The History of Sir Charles Grandison, 1753. Richardson began his literary career late, publishing his first novel Pamela at age 51, which became highly successful and is often called the first English novel due to its focus on individual morality and personal experience. His novels explore themes such as virtue, morality, social class, gender roles, and human psychology with a deep focus on characters' inner lives conveyed through letter writing. Richardson's innovative narrative style and moral concerns influenced later novelists like Jane Austen and shaped the development of the modern novel. Henry Fielding, 1707. Henry Fielding was an English novelist and playwright considered a key founder of the modern English novel alongside Samuel Richardson. His famous novels include Joseph Andrews, 1742, The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling, 1749, and Amelia, 1751. Fielding is known for his satirical style, humor, rich characterization, and social critique, often highlighting human nature's complexities and moral weaknesses. Tom Jones is considered as his masterpiece, a comic and picaresque novel that explores the adventures and growth of an orphan, presenting a vivid picture of 18th century English society. Fielding's works often blend realism and satire, using complex plots and lively English dialogues to critique social and political issues of his time. Oliver Goldsmith (1728 to 1774) was an Anglo-Irish poet, novelist, playwright, and essayist, known for his versatility across multiple literary genres including poetry, drama, and prose. His most famous works include the sentimental novel The Vicar of Wakefield (1766), the comedic play She Stoops to Conquer (1773), and the pastoral poem The Deserted Village (1770). Goldsmith was a prominent figure of the Georgian era, praised for his balanced style, good sense, and intellectual honesty, and was a close friend of Samuel Johnson. The Vicar of Wakefield remains a classic of English literature, admired for its warm portrayal of rural life and moral themes, influencing later authors like Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. Despite literary success, Goldsmith struggled with financial difficulties throughout his life, but left a lasting legacy in English literature through his wide-ranging works and charming writing style. Samuel Johnson (1709 to 1784), often called Dr. Johnson, was a towering English writer, poet, playwright, essayist, moralist, literary critic, biographer, editor, and lexicographer, immensely influential in 18th century literature. He is best known for his monumental work A Dictionary of the English Language (1755), which standardized English spelling and usage and remained the preeminent English dictionary for over 150 years. Johnson's literary criticism includes lives of the most eminent English poets and his annotated edition of Shakespeare 1765, where he emphasized practical understanding of literature over theoretical schools. His essays and periodical writings in The Rambler, The Idler, and The Adventurer discusses morality, literature, society, and religion with elevated prose and neoclassical style. Johnson's literary contributions extend to poetry, biography, travel literature, and his enduring legacy as a moral and literary guide of his time. Thomas Hardy was a prominent Victorian novelist and poet known for his richly descriptive works set in the semi-fictional region of Wessex, which was inspired by southwestern England. His major novels include Far from the Maddling Crowd (1874), The Mayor of Casterbridge (1886), Tess of the Urbervilles (1891), and Jude the Obscure (1895), many of which deal with tragic characters struggling against social conventions and fate. Hardy's novels are noted for their critical views of Victorian society, especially regarding issues like sexual morality, class barriers, and the declining rural way of life. His narrative style blends realism with poetic language, often depicting human suffering, passion, and the relentless force of nature and fate. Later in life, Hardy focused more on poetry and dramatic works like The Dynast, but his legacy as a novelist remains influential in English literature for exploring human tragedy and social critique. Elizabeth Gaskell was a Victorian English novelist, biographer, and short story writer known for her detailed studies of Victorian society and the lives of the poor and working class. Her major novels include Mary Barton (1848), Cranford, North and South, and Wives and Daughters, many of which focus on social issues like industrialization, class conflict, and women's roles. Gaskell's work combines social realism with compassion, highlighting the struggles of industrial workers while critiquing contemporary social attitudes and Victorian morality. She was a close friend of Charlotte Bronte and wrote the important biography The Life of Charlotte Bronte 1857, which helped establish Bronte's literary legacy. Gaskell's writing style blends vivid characterization, strong narrative, and moral vision, and she remains an influential figure in Victorian literature, particularly for her portrayal of gender and class dynamics. Charlotte Bronte was a Victorian English novelist and poet, best known for her novel Jane Eyre, a groundbreaking work recognized for the strong independent female protagonist. She initially published under the pen name Currer Bell to avoid gender bias and gained literary fame with Jane Eyre, which combines themes of morality, love, and social criticism. Other significant works by her include Shirley, Villette, and The Professor, each exploring complex characters and social issues particularly related to women's experiences. Charlotte was part of the famous Bronte literary family, which included her sisters Emily, Anne, and was friends with Elizabeth Gaskell, who wrote her biography. Her writing style is noted for its emotional intensity, Gothic elements, the exploration of individual subjectivity, and its critique of class and gender inequalities in Victorian society. Jane Eyre is a coming of age novel that follows the life of Jane Eyre, an orphaned girl who faces a harsh childhood, grows into an independent and strong willed woman, and works as a governess at Thornfield Hall. At Thornfield, Jane falls in love with the mysterious Mr. Rochester, but their romance faces a major obstacle when Jane discovers Rochester is already married to Bertha Mason, a mentally ill woman kept secretly in the attic. Jane leaves Thornfield to maintain her moral integrity and independence, surviving hardships until she is taken in by the Rivers family, who turn out to be her relatives. She also inherits a fortune from her uncle, securing her financial independence. St. John Rivers, one of her cousins, proposes marriage to Jane to accompany him as a missionary's wife, but she declines, feeling no love for him and still connected to Rochester. The novel ends with Jane reuniting with a low disabled Rochester after Thornfield burns down. They marry and live together as equals, symbolizing mutual respect, love, and Jane's journey to self discovery and empowerment. Emily Bronte was an English novelist and poet best known for her only novel Wuthering Heights, published under the male pen name Elizabeth. Wuthering Heights is a complex Gothic romance centered on the passionate and destructive love between Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw. Set against the backdrop of the Yorkshire moors, the novel explores themes of love, revenge, social class, and the supernatural, and is notable for its non-linear narrative and multiple narrative, creating a layered story structure. Emily's writing exhibits intense emotional power, rawness, and a stark contrast to Victorian ideals, challenging contemporary morality and social norms. Through initial controversial for its brutality and dark themes, Wuthering Heights is now considered a classic of English literature and one of the greatest novels in the English language. Wuthering Heights tells the story of the intense and doomed love between Heathcliff, a foundling adopted by Mr. Earnshaw, and Catherine Earnshaw, set against the wild Yorkshire moors. The novel explores themes of passion, revenge, social class conflict, and the supernatural, illustrating how love can become destructive and toxic. Heathcliff suffers humiliation and cruelty from Hindley Earnshaw, which fuels his lifelong desire for revenge against the Earnshaw and Linton families. After Catherine marries Edgar Linton, Heathcliff leaves and returns years later as a wealthy man, seeking to assert control over both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Gang. The narrative is framed by the newcomer Mr. Lockwood, and much of the story is told by Nellie Dean, the housekeeper, creating a layered narration about complex family relationships, suffering, and eventual redemption through the next generation. Areopagitica is a powerful prose work by John Milton, advocating for freedom of speech and freedom of the press, written in response to the English Parliament's licensing order of 1643, which imposed pre-publication censorship. Milton argued that censorship harms society by restricting the free exchange of ideas and knowledge, which are essential for intellectual and moral growth. He believed that individuals should have the freedom to choose what they read and must be trusted to exercise their own judgment between truth and falsehood, rather than leave decisions to government censors. The work criticizes tyrannical and religious censorship, using examples such as the Roman Catholic Church and the Spanish Inquisition as warnings against oppressive control. Though initially unsuccessful in influencing Parliament to repeal the law, Areopagitica remains one of the earliest and most eloquent defenses of free expression, and intellectual liberty, influencing later democratic and liberal thought. John Bunyan was an English writer and Puritan preacher, best known for his Christian allegory The Pilgrim's Progress, which is one of the most published books in English language and a major influence on Christian literature. Bunyan was born in Elstow, Bedfordshire, into a poor family and worked as a tinker before his spiritual conversion and entry into preaching. He had limited formal education but was self taught and an avid reader. He was imprisoned for about 12 years for preaching without a license after the restoration of the monarchy, during which he wrote Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners and began The Pilgrim's Progress. The Pilgrim's Progress, published in two parts, is an allegory of a Christian journey from the city of destruction to the celestial city, using symbolic characters and events to illustrate spiritual trials and virtues. Bunyan continued to preach and write after his release, producing other religious works such as The Holy War and Life and Death of Mr. Badman. He died in 1688 and was buried in Burnhill Fields, a burial ground for non-conformists in London. The Pilgrim's Progress is a Christian allegory written as a dream narration following the protagonist Christian's journey from the city of destruction to the celestial city, heaven, symbolizing the spiritual path of a believer towards salvation. Christian starts burdened by his awareness of sin and is directed by evangelists to seek redemption through the wicket gate, overcoming numerous symbolic trials such as the Slough of Despond, Vanity Fair and Doubting Castle. Throughout the journey, Christian encounters various characters embodying virtues and vices such as Faithful, Hopeful, Giant Despair and Mr. Worldly Wise Man, who either hinder or aid his pilgrimage, representing the moral and theological challenges faced by Christians. In the story's climax, Christian and his companion Hopeful must cross a river to enter the celestial city, where they are joyfully welcomed, portraying the final stage of spiritual salvation and eternal life. The second part of the book follows Christian's wife, Christiana, and their children as they undertake the same pilgrimage, emphasizing themes of communal faith, redemption, and perseverance in the Christian life.